Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. The truth is, as far back as May, Arun Jaitley said that he would only hold dual charge of the Defence Ministry till sometime in July. Now, 5 months later, two major papers have reported that a significant reshuffle is likely in weeks or even possibly by the end of this month. So after yesterday's changes in the Finance Ministry, we ask, what more can we expect? And how will this change the functioning of the Modi government? My guests are a senior fellow of Shivnadar University and a former editor of The Hindu, Siddharth Vardarajan, the chairman of APCA, Badshah Sen, who will be joining us shortly, the political editor of Business Standard, Aditi Phadnis, and the executive editor of Headlines Today, Javed Ansari. Siddharth Vardarajan, today's Times of India's lead front page story says the Prime Minister is expected to carry out a major cabinet expansion of his Council of Ministers and a reshuffle of top bureaucrats in the next few weeks and definitely before the winter session of Parliament, which in fact starts in about a month's time. The Business Standard says that this could happen in fact by the end of this month. Now, for many people, this was actually expected in July, and as you know, Arun Jaitley as good as said so way back in May. So to begin with, is this expansion somewhat long overdue?
Highly overdue. You'll remember when cabinet was sworn in, Mr. Modi, a lot of us were quite critical of Mr. Modi making too much of a virtue of his so-called lean government. Because when you carry leanness so far that you have ministers doubling up with important portfolios, Raksha Mantri and Finance Minister being the case in point, but there are lots of other examples too. This is bound to affect the efficiency of decision making and the efficiency of government. And I think somewhere down the line, Mr. Modi has delayed this process. We all heard at the time that in a month or so there would be an expansion. Although, if you ask me frankly, I didn't understand the logic behind why a defense minister could not be found on the day of the Prime Minister's swearing in and would miraculously appear 2 or 3 months later. The fact that it's been something like 4 months now, there's no defense minister in sight, tells us something either about the Prime Minister's style of functioning or the poor bench strength of the BJP and the NDA. I don't quite know what it is. Mr. Modi is really perhaps the only man who knows his own mind. But certainly, to answer your question, I mean, it is definitely overdue, and I think it's important that some of these portfolios have full-time ministers, because without them, this is creating problems.
Now, in fact, the Times of India, Javed Ansari says that one reason for expansion could be a reason to accommodate important communities before the next round of state elections. The paper talks about the Bhumihar community who are supporters of the BJP in Bihar. It talks about the Jat and adds that in particular, if BJP wins Haryana and doesn't appoint a Jat CM, then accommodating the Jats in cabinet would be important. Do you think that these sort of community-based considerations are weighing heavily with the Prime Minister, or is this just journalistic speculation?
No, he disregarded it to begin with, but I guess now he realizes, especially in the wake of what's likely to, if they win Haryana and they have a non-Jat chief minister, let's not forget they don't have anybody from the Jat community, they don't have anybody from Rajasthan. They also have very poor representation from Bihar, and the next big test will be Bihar. Next year, Bihar goes to the polls, and therefore the urgency with which the Prime Minister needs to tackle this must be telling on him. And like Siddharth was saying, I think he also realizes there's a paucity of talent pool. The talent pool is very short, barring maybe Arun Jaitley, who's been unfortunately laid low by health reasons, and a Sushma Swaraj, and to some extent maybe Piyush Goyal. There's not much to look to boast of in terms of talent, and maybe he needs to go out and search for it. He's taken a good positive step by getting in somebody like Mr. Subramanian. Perhaps there is a case now for the likes of Arun Chori and others to be indicted.
Let's pick up on that point that you were both making, Siddharth Vardarajan and Javed Ansari, about the bench strength. Now, in fact, one explanation way back in May why the Council of Ministers was kept so small and so many people had double charge for almost 5 months is that the Prime Minister had a dearth of talent to choose from. Has that constraint suddenly disappeared, or do you think he's decided to expand despite that limitation? Siddharth?
So are you asking me?
Yes, I am.
Yes, okay, sorry. I wasn't sure who the question was. No, I think it's a combination of the lack of talent and the lack of trust that Mr. Modi might have for senior and capable leaders, right? Because that's the only explanation. I mean, it's not all that difficult to find from among your MPs people who have experience or who have some track record of delivering governance, no matter at what level. I think it's a question of whether Mr. Modi wanted them in that position, or perhaps he chose the optic of a lean government and finds himself stuck with that. But there's plenty of, as far as Raksha Mantri goes, somebody like Ravi Shankar Prasad, he was in Vajpayee's cabinet. He served well in that government. He's a senior minister, certainly among the upper echelons of the BJP leadership. I can't see why somebody like him couldn't be a Raksha Mantri rather than having Mr. Jaitley double up for 4 months. It just doesn't make sense.
Aditi Fadnis, let's come to the ministers who could be affected, and let's start with Arun Jaitley, who has dual charge of both finance as well as defense. Would you say that given his illness and given the fact that defense is a very weighty portfolio that needs a minister of its own, is almost certain when that reshuffle happens that Arun Jaitley will lose one portfolio and the one he's likely to lose is defense?
I think that's fair. And I think it's possible that Mr. Modi may have a candidate for defense. Last we heard his candidate was, may have been the Goa Chief Minister Manohar Parrikar, who is, a technocrat and has an IIT degree and has a reputation of being very clean. There is a feeling that Mr. Jaitley may make a better defense minister than he will a finance minister. This is the view of several of his admirers, including a former finance minister whom I will not name. But I think ultimately he is needed so much in financial policy making that I think he is going to be retained in that portfolio.
Bacha Sen, you heard Aditi speculate about the possibility of Manohar Parrikar becoming defense minister, but in fact Manohar Parrikar, if he does, would create a huge vacuum in Goa which may be more difficult to fill. What about the possibility of Mr. Modi putting in Suresh Prabhu, who it was said he wanted in the first place but wasn't able to do because the Shiv Sena objected? Now, if he ends up winning Maharashtra on Sunday, which is likely, and thereafter isn't dependent or doesn't need to worry about the Shiv Sena's reaction, do you think he could actually take that last step and give the job to Suresh Prabhu?
It's entirely possible. The point is, I have a slightly different take on all this, because so far we've been assuming that Prime Minister Modi is going to follow conventional wisdom, received wisdom, the normal logic. But from whatever I've seen to gather and what I've read about and what people have said about him, he doesn't think either inside the box or outside the box. He doesn't seem to be following any logic which we've seen so far. There is talk of that his method is a sort of what's known as disruptive innovation. He doesn't take incremental steps. So if this person isn't good enough, I will replace him. I will wait and see. He takes transformational steps. He's not going to jump from one to the other in one itty-bitty step.
It's interesting, the two adjectives you use together to describe the same thing. Disruptive on the one hand, transformational on the other. One's negative, the other's positive, but you think they would lead to the same result.
That's right. And the basic point is, you see, because he hasn't followed any logic when he established his that first Council of Ministers. He gave a huge weightage to UP. He gave 0 to Rajasthan. He's given nothing to Himachal Pradesh. I don't think he's looked at caste considerations. About the only things he's looked at.
There is one Rajasthani minister who's accused of rape.
Yeah,
Minister of State.
But the Minister of State. That's right.
Let's move away from this business of whether the Prime Minister will be disruptive or transformational, because that is an interpretation of what he'll do. Let's see if we can actually come to what he will do. There are other ministers than Mr. Jaitley who have dual charges. That list includes Nitin Gadkari, Ravi Shankar Prasad, Prakash Javadekar, Nirmala Sitharaman, Piyush Goyal, Venkaiah Naidu. Do you believe that all of them will lose one ministry in this expansion, as some papers speculate? Or do you think there could be some logic to retaining, for instance, coal and power with Piyush, for keeping Nirmala both as Minister of State in Finance as well as Minister of State for Commerce and Industry? Is there some logic in retaining a few portfolios which are kept clubbed together?
Karan, my take is that Nirmala will be divested of one, because she can't continue in independent charge of corporate affairs and MS of finance. In Piyush's case, it makes a lot of sense, but not so much in Nirmala Sitharaman's case. She already has her hands full because Mr. Jaitley has not been able to give it the time and energy that normally he would have but for these health issues. And therefore, we shouldn't be too surprised if Nirmala Sitharaman is just put in charge of one. Maybe there will be an additional MOS in finance. Piyush, from what I gather, will continue doing what he is.
Aditi Fadnis, let me put another point about these dual charge ministers to you. Initially, it was believed by most analysts that by giving people like Piyush Goyal and Nirmala Sitharaman double charges, the Prime Minister was actually controlling their ministries through them. Now, if an expansion means splitting up those double charges, will it dilute the Prime Minister's direct control, or will he continue to control those ministries and those portfolios through the new people he puts under them?
I think the Prime Minister's control is indubitable. It's beyond any kind of argument. And just because a minister has two charges, it doesn't become easier for him to control it. He's going to control it anyway, regardless of whether the minister has 2 portfolios or 5 portfolios or 10 portfolios. He's going to act as he has been doing through the bureaucrats. We know for a fact that bureaucrats are have meetings with the Prime Minister when he desires, and they can also get in touch with him without any difficulty. We also know that there was a case where a bureaucrat overruled his minister. The minister complained to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister weighed in with the bureaucrat.
Absolutely.
So I don't think there's any problem in that. I think what the disappointing part is that the kind of administrative rationalization that we expected from the Modi government has simply not come. There are some natural ministries which should be clubbed together.
Let me stop there. I'll come to that. I'll come to that particular issue in a moment's time, and I'll take it up in a moment's time with direct relevance to the finance ministry, which you know better than everyone else. But first, Siddharth Varadarajan, beyond the problem of dual charge ministers, expansions or cabinet reshuffles are also opportunities to drop ministers. Do you see any minister being dropped? Would you say, for instance, because of the problems with the Shiv Sena, Anant Gite is a possibility?
I think that depends on the final verdict on Sunday, Karan, because if the BJP falls short of numbers, and if the fanciful prediction of an NCP-BJP alliance doesn't materialize, then the BJP has to go back to the Shiv Sena. And I don't think the kicking out Mr. Gite from cabinet, even though there's plenty of grounds to do so given the rupture in relations, I think the BJP would think very carefully about that, because they have to decide, is this a permanent break with the Shiv Sena, or is it merely a readjustment so that the BJP establishes who is the senior partner in Maharashtra? But I think that, I would be surprised if anybody else gets the chop so early, because that would, on the one hand, it might send a signal from Mr. Modi that I'm really serious about performance. But on the other, there's been so much of rah-rah over the last 4 months that I think he would be he would really not want to send a signal that any part of his government, particularly the government that he's supposed to be closely supervising, is underperforming. So I would be surprised if somebody is dropped at this stage.
Very quickly, I'm going to put the same question to both of you. Not only are expansions moments to drop a minister, there are also occasionally, to promote a minister. Do you see, first you, Badsha, anyone being promoted?
Well, I don't really see it at the moment, although people should be promoted. I cannot understand why Power is still a minister of state. Modi is a cabinet minister of power. Petroleum is again, Modi is the petroleum minister. And chemical and fertilizer, which used to be a tag on with petroleum, is a full-fledged cabinet ministry. So I think if one were to go by track record, I do believe that Piyush Goyal deserves a promotion. Whether Mr. Modi is going to do that or not, I don't know.
He names the possibility of Piyush Goyal as deserving a promotion. He talked about petroleum. Petroleum is with Pradhan. Do you think Pradhan deserves a promotion? Most people will probably say not. Do you think there are any candidates who deserve a promotion?
Well, there's nobody that comes readily to mind, barring, of course, Piyush. But, of course, there is a case for people to be inducted. They have some talent. Mr. Sinha, the Jayant Sinha, he's one who shines out. Perhaps, like I said earlier, there is a case.
But he couldn't go much beyond Minister of State because he's a first-time MP.
First-time MP, but then, he's impressed a lot of people with the way he's performed in the first few months in Parliament. There's also a case for some talent that's outside, but within the BJP that can be brought in. And perhaps it's time for Mr. Modi to demonstrate that he can think out of the box.
In other words, you're saying reach deeper into your allies and pick from there.
Not just allies, but maybe like somebody like Mr. Arun Shourie. The problem with Arun Shourie was that there was some interpersonal problem. Now it's for Mr. Modi. He has the stature, he has the standing to be able to reconcile that and ensure that
Stick your neck out very quickly and give me a one-word answer. Do you think he will take that risk and bring in Arun Shourie?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
He's also over 70, I think.
Oh, but he's not over 75.
75, yes.
75 is the cutoff mark.
Yeah.
Aditi Fatnas, let's come to this business of the finance ministry changes, because I want to also talk a little bit in the time left to us about what happened yesterday. Earlier this month, Arvind Mayaram actually took Arun Jaitley's place at the IMF and the World Bank meetings. Suddenly on Wednesday night, and we found out Thursday morning, he's been shunted from finance to tourism, and Rajiv Maharishi, the Rajasthan Chief Secretary, has been brought in. How do you read this?
Well, I mean, to put it very succinctly, earlier in the week, Arvind Mayaram was finance secretary, and now he's not. He seems to have adjusted into his new job quite well, and has reconciled to his situation. But the fact is that the government did want to give new faces to the people while unrolling new policies, and felt that it would be just carrying old baggage. Already the charges are being made that all you're doing is what the Congress had already done. The fact is you can't get rid of that. There is this degree of continuity in running government, but they want to change the faces so that it doesn't look like old wine in old bottles.
Can I interrupt you there? Is it just a question of changing faces so it doesn't look like old wine in old bottles? Or when you look at the fact that Arvind Subramaniam has also been brought in as the new chief economic advisor, and you consider the fact that both Subramaniam and Maharishi are said to be pro-reform, is this a sign, the first credible sign, that we're going to see far-reaching structural reform in the next budget? Or is that an over-interpretation? Aditi?
Well, I would really like to see structural reform, particularly movement on diesel deregulation, movement on gas pricing, movement on disinvestment, much of which we have only talked about.
I know you'd like to see it, but do you think this is a sign it'll happen? Is this a sign it'll happen, or are you just reading your own desire into it?
I think it will happen now.
So this is the first sign that in fact this government is committed to structural reform.
I think so, because in appointing Arvind Subramanian, they have appointed a person who, as we know, was actually quite critical of the Modi government. He criticized not just the government stand on the WTO, but also criticized Mr. Jaitley's budget for its revenue forecasting and said that he's being too optimistic.
Quite right.
So I think we should expect some plain talking. And plain talking means some action on that plain talking. I don't think Mr. Subramanian has been appointed to be an ornament in the finance ministry.
Siddharth Varadarajan, I want to ask you very quickly what the appointment of Maharishi as the new economic affairs secretary and Arvind Subramaniam as the new chief economic advisor suggests about Arun Jaitley as finance minister. I know a moment ago you would have heard Aditi Fatnas say that there are people saying that in fact Mr. Jaitley should lose finance and retain defense. But given that he's the man who clearly shepherded these two people into their jobs, and given his closeness to Mr. Modi, do you think in fact he's emerging as a very powerful finance minister?
I would be very surprised if he were to lose finance. I think finance is the portfolio that he enjoys. I think it's the portfolio that the wider investor community who represent the client base, so to speak, of the finance ministry look up to. So I'd be very surprised, and clearly I think the induction of Arvind Subramaniam and Mr. Maharishi bear his imprimatur. I don't think it's a question of new faces, quite frankly, because who in the public even knows the name of the finance secretary, let alone what he looks like.
Quite right.
It's a question of bringing somebody from Rajasthan who for the last year has been running experiments of one kind or the other. His name is associated with the labor reforms, with some tinkering of the land acquisition. I'm not sure that these are necessarily the best kind of initiatives, but shows Mr. Jaitley's desire to get the ball rolling. I suspect he will emerge as a more powerful and more determined finance minister in the next couple of months.
One last question about, in fact, what this tells us about the Modi government. The interesting thing, and you heard Aditi point this out, is that Arvind Subramaniam has quite often been critical of this government. For instance, when the government refused to sign the WTO trade facilitation agreement, he said this made India look obstructionist. He said the reputational cost of blocking the TFA could be high. talking about Mr. Jaitley's first budget, and Mr. Jaitley now is his boss, he says, this was a budget prepared by incumbent bureaucrats, not incoming politicians. And he added, it represented continuity when the need of the hour was changed. Now, if this very man, very knowingly and deliberately, is brought in as chief economic advisor, ignoring his criticisms, does it not suggest that, in fact, A, they're not holding it against him, B, they have no problem with this sort of criticism from academics, and C, they see qualities in him which they want, which perhaps will push them in the direction he wants to push them? Would you agree with all of that? Or
yeah, well, I would agree with all of that, in fact. And the point is, I do believe that the only structure, that the only way forward for this government, I don't necessarily agree with them, is through economic reforms. And the new finance secretary has a track record of that in Rajasthan. Subramaniam has the same, no matter how much criticism there is. In fact, the criticism against this government has come more from that bunch of economists who were supporting the Modi in the run-up to the elections. And in spite of which, the same critics are still behind this government.
Let me put that to you very quickly. Journalists are often critical of politicians because we suspect, and often we see this as well, that they don't like criticism, least of all from people who are their subordinates. Here you have a finance minister and a prime minister deliberately bringing in a man who's been very critical of them. Is that a little reassuring, or am I over-interpreting?
It's reassuring, but it shouldn't end here. This needs to expand.
Get in more critics, you mean?
Get in people who don't necessarily are enamored of you.
All right, and you may find they will, but maybe you find they won't. But this at least is a decent start.
Certainly.
My thanks to both of you coming to studio. My thanks also to my other guests. And my apologies for the fact that occasionally we lost Aditi. That's because of bad weather in Delhi at the moment. But that's the end of this particular episode. Have a wonderful weekend. See you on Monday. Goodbye. Good night.